I have seen a lot of discussion surrounding Andor's underwhelming performance of recent, and I'm here to put it to rest. Let's first start with the most obvious reason for this. Disney. Since acquiring Star Wars, they've released stinker after stinker. Yes, they left us with successes such as Mando and Bad Batch, but there is only so much stink people can breathe in before they are left with an unpleasant feeling and leave your platform. This also has not been helped by other recent releases by the MCU driving people to greener pastures. Just because you have a few great shows doesn't mean that's enough to outweigh all the bad shows. Don't get me wrong, there is more to Disney than the MCU and Star Wars, but these are the biggest franchises on the platform, therefore the biggest reason for people to get Disney Plus. But other than disappointments leading up to the show, is the show actually as good as people are making it out to be? The simple answer is kind of. I personally have enjoyed every moment of the show, but the biggest problem it has is its slow pacing in the initial 5 episodes. There's almost no major action that happens until episode 3. And after that, we have to wait until episode 6 before we get any more. And in the meantime, we spend a lot of time with people talking and walking. For a lot of people, this makes for a grueling experience. The pacing also means the hooks are few and far between. Fan servicing also plays a part, as it comes up a lot when talking about Andor, with people saying it doesn't have any and that's what makes it great, but then others saying it doesn't have any, which means it's bad. But I think to say the show has a lack of or no fan servicing would be a bit of a lie. Spoilers ahead. Did we not get Yularen making an appearance? Did we not have Easter eggs whenever we went to the antique shop? Did we not finally get the Rakata finally canonized into the Disney universe? Do we not have people like Mon Mothma? The thing I'm trying to get at is the fan servicing was there, but not in the way it had previously been done. Before, the fan servicing would feel out of place or slightly pointless. In the case of Cad Bane in the Book of Boba Fett, or the Inquisitor base that the story accommodated to in Kenobi as a reason to drag the show out for longer. Cad Bane was only really put into Book of Boba Fett to get the standoff that was previously in a Star Wars animation that didn't get finished. My point being is these are much easier to recognise, as these have been built up in the mainstream beforehand and so have a much higher status in the casual fan base. I didn't even know this was Yularen until going on YouTube. I think people also forget fan servicing is not just by having Jedi or Sith or characters from the Clone Wars, but is when the show or film includes things that will please the viewer, which to a lot of Star Wars fans will be having references to previous films and shows being intertwined, such as the story of Yularen from Clone Wars to Andor to the final end when the Death Star is destroyed. When watching a Star Wars show, there is also a level of expectation people have, and when this is not met, it can turn people away, so the show has to work much harder in order to please this group of people. They will not always notice this fan servicing, which takes away from the excitement of seeing these characters. The audience for the show is definitely targeted at a much older demographic than the 12-year-olds and above that George Lucas planned Star Wars to be for. This can be highlighted by the lack of action, going back to my earlier point, and there was also the brothel scene, which parents might not be willing to show their children, not because it's got any inappropriate scenes, but because of what it implies. Andor is also much darker than previous shows we've gotten, such as Kenobi. This won't necessarily be the biggest of the issues, as usually it's the parents paying for the account, meaning that they will probably still watch the show, and we wouldn't know if it's 2 or 4 watching it at any time. But to ignore this factor when Disney's whole principle is around children-friendly content would be a massive oversight. The MCU, the other big IP, has always been consistently 12s and around there, and never really reached out to 15s and 18s because that's not their main demographic. Interest in Andor was low from the beginning, and so was never destined to outperform previous shows. People knew the conclusion of Andor's story, so they were never really invested in the character. Unlike Kenobi, he was not a character people had connected with on a deeper level. People also are incredibly busy now, everything has reopened since COVID, and so work and social life has taken priority, and the way people fill those few hours they do have will be spent on other shows that sound or look more interesting and provide more action. The biggest reason I feel Andor has not been pulling the numbers like the other shows is the marketing. Not just for the show, but other shows that have been released around it. As Andor began to build up to the release, I found the ads for the show were almost non-existent, and this was exacerbated by the tidal wave of noise made by other releases of the time, such as She-Hulk, Rings of Power, and House of Dragons. The negative publicity of She-Hulk and Rings of Power was making the rounds on YouTube, and rightfully so. This meant it was drowning out videos covering Andor, and the show was not helped by the gaslighting of the media companies who were writing articles that they knew would generate more money. Articles that could have been spent talking about Andor were instead invested in short-term click-through rates, as the media knew what was more financially worth it. In addition to this negative media, there was also another show Andor had to compete for spotlight from, and that was House of Dragons, as it was making its redemption arc for Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones was a loved franchise despite its disappointing finale, bringing fans old and new to HBO. If Andor was instead delayed till the end of House of Dragons, the numbers could have looked much better for the opening few episodes. But, as anything, we will not know. I don't know whether or not this would have made much of an impact anyway. It's just a guess that I'm having to make from what I can infer. One thing that is hard to tell is how much of an effect people's income is on their ability to pay monthly to watch the show. Lower income houses are having an especially hard time in the UK as energy prices have literally skyrocketed, and I'm sure people across the world are almost feeling this, and the first thing people are usually going to do when cutting down costs is that ending their subscription to streaming platforms. Turn this off, the numbers may not be as high as people expected, but the show will continue to draw in viewers long after it is finished, as people might be waiting for the entire show to be released before they watch it. This allows them to binge it, or they just may not at all. If there is another reason I left out that you think could have been a reason for the numbers being so much lower than the previous shows, leave a comment. Thank you everyone, goodbye.